Hey, you're listening to the B3 podcast. Thanks for listening in. My name's Nick Strauss.
And I'm James Hughes.
And I'm Larisa Karr.
And I'm John Pannell.
And we are your curators for the next hour or so. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is it that we have to discuss today?
Politics, right?
Politics. Yep.
I'm sure nobody's discussed that in the last couple, months.
I want to ask a question. What are politics?
I actually have an answer from one of my old professors. So I transferred from UNC Greensboro, and I had a professor named Jeffrey Bain. He's been published in a couple of things, but the way, and it sticks in my mind years later, but the way he defined politics was the authoritative allocation of values. So the idea there is that everybody has their individual values, that defines who we are and how we, not necessarily how we vote, but of course it will inform that, but it's how we view the world and what we, value. And then there's the authoritative allocation of values, which determines how we vote and who we support and who we want in charge.
And how it's broken down, right?
Yeah.
Right, and the reason I ask what are politics is because I feel like we throw around the whole topic so much, and it's like such a domineering part of our identity in 2017. You know what I mean? I want to really go down to the basic core, like strip it down. What are we dealing with here? Let's not talk about Trump yet. Let's not talk about like the election and Hillary. I want to address kind of the role politics play in our lives as the next generation,
Well, an idea with politics, a country being as large as we are right now, not every person's going to have a voice. So generally the idea, especially if you go into a democracy, is that we have anointed people who are supposed to speak for us. One thing that's been so fascinating in this last couple of years is how different the entire political scene has become compared to years before, years prior, not just for the president, but for Senate, Congress, House of Representatives, your local politicians. The entire canvas of what your voice is seems to be changing.
And I think that's a good point. I think if you rewind back 8 years, there was a sense of optimism, I feel, and now there's a lot of negativity, a lot of pessimism, a lot of aggression. And yeah, that definitely, I think, has to do with overarching political themes.
And a large part of that message and a large part of that change is going to come from the media. We don't necessarily have eyes in the White House. We don't have eyes in Congress meetings. But we do have our pundits, essentially, at this point. And I guess in between people who appear on your nightly news networks or your 24-hour running news networks to basically give their opinion of what they've seen go on in the political game. So that's just like the game, I forgot what the name of it was, He Said, or something like that. When you're in kindergarten, the teacher tells you one sentence, and then you tell the person beside you.
Oh, telephone.
There we go.
Telephone.
Yeah, I remember
It's
that.
that same concept. So we have what's actually happening in the political grand scheme of things. Saying one thing, you have the media saying something else a little bit different, where we perceive it a little bit different, and then we tell our peers and our friends something that's just a little bit different from what the original beginning message was. And so I feel like that changes a huge truth of what's actually going on.
Right. I mean, I think that there's enough wires being crossed and people being misled by this new wave of fake news. I mean, yellow journalism is back, folks. And it's better than ever because it could trick a relatively smart person. If your media outlets are like narrow enough, you might fall victim, to some crazy news. And what's sad is that, we all know that there are things going on in government, crazy things that we might not be privy to, and that you can't distinguish anymore between like what's real and like who's trying to manipulate you and their message,
call me a conspiracy theorist, but I feel like that's part of the idea. To create this distrust with the media, and so from that distrust, anything can happen behind the scenes that wouldn't normally, if it would be reported on, it would have a bigger punch. But with that distrust, it's a lot easier to just kind of brush it off or say, oh, it's someone else's perspective telling me one way or something else. You look at Facebook, for example, too. You're talking about the how much fake news and all of that there is, how easy it is to fall in that trap. Simply scrolling, you see an article, read the headline, the picture is pretty presentable. The picture came from the AP press, so it has a little bit of a professional background on that end. Not necessarily looking at the article, who released it. It could just be mere opinion presented as facts. Scrolling through Facebook, not wanting to take 15 extra minutes to look into it. Easy to take that opinion one way, kind of push it off as fact to the next person, and then that telephone game just keeps going.
I mean, and people are on Facebook, especially our generation. We're on Facebook so much by and large, right? They're scrolling through and assimilating these small snippets and these little opinions and these fake news stories. You scroll you're probably not clicking on all of them or any of them sometimes, but it's embedding itself in your mind. You know what I mean? Just as advertising in general works. And so it kind of makes me question the legitimacy of politics in today's age, simply because I'm seeing more parallels between advertising and politics than I am between how it used to be, which would be like news and politics.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think there's a very, in a way, I think politics can kind of be compared to Hollywood as well. It's, like this cult of personality. And it's very sensationalized and very, you see like presidents and like Melania Trump on the cover of Vanity Fair, and like you're taught to like idolize these people or like, read about them in the newspaper and, oh, what were they wearing? Or like, just it's very sensationalized.
And distracting from any kind of real issue.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Like, I saw the recent issue of, it's the Mexican Vanity Fair, and it has Melania Trump sitting at a kitchen table, the cover, and she's eating, she's pretending to eat, but there's, like, a bunch of jewelry in her cereal bowl. And I think the fact that that can actually be, like, that image can be acknowledged is... I don't know. It's scary if you think about our society, what that's saying.
I think we live in such an identity-driven time. It's hard to tell if the politics of the age are engendering that or making use of it. Because politics certainly didn't invent social media, but it certainly in recent years has made use of it. A lot of rumors about how Trump used Facebook data exclusively to know what to say where. During his grassroots campaign, and it proved to be fairly effective, And I think to bring it back to what I was originally saying, like, I think that politics wouldn't be so as ingrained in our minds and in our culture now if it wasn't so tied to our identity on either side. You know what I mean? It's tough. It seems the most radical idea is the middle ground these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to not have a stand. One thing that you mentioned about politics having an identity now, how Trump used Facebook and a lot of social media. One thing that I like to think about, I forgot who was the first president to really utilize the radio as
I think it was Kennedy.
I actually want to say it was FDR because he did
the fireside chats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so that was a complete new platform. Took him a pretty good way. Kennedy was the first one to use the television the way he did. Right now, the internet and especially social media is just like a Wild West. Donald Trump came in, used that as his platform, and I feel like in history he's going to go down as that type. You look at how much information Facebook can track on you, how much information Google can track on you, and then there's how much of that information do we know isn't given away to some other higher bidder or being used for some other marketing purpose.
I had said the thing about advertising and politics seeming to be one and the same. It's funny now how they're using the same exact algorithms and mediums to get your information. Like Trump was using the same data that Amazon would be using to sell you a specific brand of ham or something. You know?
Exactly. Instead of selling a product, they're selling their ideas,
Which
specifically, or themselves.
Neatly packaged up and made into some radicalized product, I think.
Yeah.
It has the labeling and the branding, everything that you want to see and how you want to perceive it. And it's given to you in that package.
Yeah, and it's almost kind of like a dystopian novel in a way, if you think about it. Just like the commodification of ideas, of identity. It's, I don't know.
Individualism is dead no matter how you slice it. I mean, it's like you join the collective groupthink or you have no voice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on both sides.
And on one end, I feel like social media also definitely plays into that, because if you have a voice or if you have any kind of anger or any kind of really feelings that you feel like you need to get out, usually the first thing is an angry post on Facebook or a rant on Snapchat or a rant on Twitter. Getting that message out, you feel like you're being listened to because you're seeing other people's rants, so that instantly pacifies you, and so you're okay with not making a major emotion because you aired your grievances out.
I mean, and Trump is using those, he's lumping all those sentiments together, and he's looking at the big picture, because of course the big picture is found in the details. And so you might have a rant and 35 other people in your small area might have a similar rant. And it just might be that those 35 people in your area are racist towards a certain group of people. Trump's going to know exactly what race to start talking shit about. And he's going to know exactly how and where to do it.
Yeah,
and,
the demographics.
Mm-hmm. And when he does, the liberal media is going to take that and blow it out of proportion to try and sell you against Trump. All the while just amplifying what Trump did in the first place.
Exactly. And creating those battle lines, creating that from the standpoint of the liberal media, creating those battle lines and making Trump supporters and Trump himself the villain is just giving the Trump supporters power, because you're coming at me, well, I can come back twice as hard at you. And so that continues that polarization, that battle lines, that battleground that keeps happening.
And that's a really interesting point. It reminded me, because I wrote an article about my hometown where I spoke out against the racism that is pretty prevalent there. And I got messages on Facebook from people saying, "You Trump hater." And like, this was published even before Trump had announced that he was running for president. And so I don't know how they were able, like, because I was kind of shedding a light on like some of the things that have happened in the town, like super racist things. I guess that's where they inferred that I was a Trump hater. I don't know, like, because it's just weird how it's branded now.
Where is your hometown, Larisa?
Brevard.
I'm from Hendersonville. I can relate.
What's the population density out there, guys?
Like 8,000.
For a pretty large area, you'd say?
Or 4 people per waterfall.
Per white squirrel, yeah.
I find it so interesting, like, that the rural areas, like rural, that word. I find it interesting how they almost exclusively flock towards the identity of Trump, as you said, even before he had like announced his candidacy, because I think that Trump kind of represents something that they wish, like, that people in that position kind of wish that they could be, which is like more of an authoritarian power figure, something that on the surface reflects higher ideals, but really just it's like a self-interest type thing. Yeah.
I think there's a Mark Twain quote, the problem with Americans is, I'm paraphrasing, but the problem with Americans is Not that they think of themselves as exploited poor, but temporarily embarrassed millionaires. So
Yeah, no, that is.
read that as you will.
That's the American dream, really.
I mean, yeah, I mean the American dream. I mean, everyone thinks that they're the shit out here. You know that the money is just in the future. You know, and
Death of a salesman.
I honestly think that money, the tool that it is, it in recent times it's not as much empowered the masses as it has like put them into specific, classifications. And you can look at it with race, you can look at it with socioeconomically, but really, I feel like what money has done has controlled like a large portion of not only the way we think and act, but also the politics. I mean, they say if you follow the money, you can find the motive for anything. And to that end, I find it ironic that the idea of more money in the future is so appealing to people who are actively oppressed by policies enforced by people like Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy. I'm not an economist by any means, but you look at prices years and years ago, how prices have continued to go up, but yet wages aren't necessarily going up.
Exactly.
It goes right back to that distraction method. If you're working week to week to pay for what you need to get by week for week, you don't have time to think about other things. You don't have time to do what it is you want to do, that American dream aspect. And so while you're creating pieces for the production, while you're essentially selling your life away just by labor and time, you don't have a chance to really achieve anything else other than the dreams of someone else. We're not pawns on a chessboard. We are the chessboard that
Wow.
people are basically playing the game on us.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So that's deep, and also I feel quite poignant in the way things are today. I want to ask what you think of the American dream. What is it in today's America? I mean, what collectively are our goals? Like what as a generation and as a larger set of communities, like what are we striving towards? And are we on our way there, or is it just another case of the carrot dangling in front of your nose?
I think in terms of the American dream, one of the really interesting things I noticed from going to the rally in Washington was even with the Trump supporters, they were talking about this message of unity and this unity of them coming together. And so I think with the American dream, it's weirder now. It used to be all about individualism. Now there is this strange push toward unity that I think has risen out of this like proto-fascism that Trump has introduced. But it's very strange. I think the American dream now, personally, I never believed in it. I always thought it was more, a nightmare in disguise as a dream. But yeah.
It's almost like I don't know what people are talking about when they say the American dream, because you can look at it historically and you can see kind of like where the country was headed initially with that idea. And then you can see in the 50s and 60s, the nuclear family seemed to be the idea of the American dream.
Yeah, the Mad Men.
And that's that's a great show. And
Yeah.
and that's kind of a collectivism in itself. You want to like be one with the idea of success in the current society. So everyone bought the cookie cutter houses, the cars, and they made their little cookie cutter families, And like the fact that that was always a facade, meant that generations down the line suffered from all kinds of abuse. I mean, you listen to stand-up comics and all sorts of people who are about 40 years old now. They all talk about getting just beat the fuck up. Just
By their dads.
The verbal abuse between their parents, and then the generation after that was the divorce generation. Nobody wants to stay together anymore. Like half of all marriages are broken up, and that's still today. And so now it's the next generation, the millennial generation, late 80s onwards. And I'm thinking like, what collectively is our American dream? Because for me, I would say we need to organize and talk about it. We need to focus on things like sustainability. focus on things like taking a good hard look at a lot of our laws, and basically creating a society that really celebrates individuality and artistic merit, much as it was like in the 60s and 70s, but without that wave of conservatism that hit during the mid 70s onward.
I know a large part of the American dream, when it first came into, I don't want to say came into play, but when it globally became recognized, it was a very hard pushback against Marxism and especially socialism. You don't have to come against the repressors because everyone has an equal opportunity. One thing about dreams, just dreams in general, outside of any kind of metaphorical aspect, your dreams are implications of your everyday life that are built and put into your psyche when you go to sleep.
Like the Freudian view on dreams is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now taking that into a cultural aspect, the American dream is a representation of what our time is, what our culture, our generation really is continually talking about, not realizing that this is the message that our generation represents. It's just the attitude that everyone has. And so, like you were talking about earlier, that dream becoming more of a nightmare because we really don't know that direction we want to head in.
Because we've been so divided, and that's where like the detriment of the identity politics really makes its biggest mark, is because how are we supposed to organize and discover for ourselves where we want to go with the short amount of time that we've got to change things when we've been completely cut in half down the middle and both sides are so radicalized that they can't actually work towards any sort of a working future? It only really goes down its own spiral.
We can't work together if we're fighting each other.
And see, that's the biggest thing. So I think that there needs to be a push towards that form of unity, but away from the form of unity that that puts you in a certain group, such as like the collectivist ideas. I mean, like there are certain marginalized communities, right, that are fighting like really good fights for a lot of different issues, a lot of which are social justice. Some of them are like structural justice in our own society. And I think that has been used by the left. Personally, I think that's been used by the left to try and further marginalize those people by really defining them in a way that we can't quite understand yet. Because, I mean, it's like as soon as the voice is heard, it's then put neatly into a box and shoved into one corner and put into the equation instead of actually being part of a solution.
Exactly.
And I hope I'm making sense. But essentially, it's like whose problems are bigger, you know what I mean? Instead of let's solve some problems.
Right. And then at that point, whose problems are bigger? Who decides that? Who yells the loudest? Who has the most money? Who has the most political power? How do you decide really whose issues are more important than the other?
And see, that's why I'm saying by breaking down all those issues and putting them in their own separate categories, it allows for infighting, which then takes away from the larger movement of like there's a bigger picture to all of these marginalized groups. There's a bigger picture to racism. There's a bigger picture to this political landscape. And if we focus only on the individual parts, then that's as far as we're ever going to get.
Right.
And I think that is why our political landscape is how it is, because that it completely makes it impossible for these groups to work together to their capacity.
Exactly. Looking at it, just taking an example of a color wheel, all of the colors in the complete circle blend to each one to make the unity aspect of it. Whereas now the idea is to separate everybody against the spectrum to where you have everyone lining up on one, everyone else lining up on the other, and that causes a complete breakdown. Instead of sharing ideas, instead of sharing motivations to get things done, having that breakdown, just distracts.
And I mean, there's not really a clear solution as of yet, and that's what kills me the most, because it seems like the farther we go down this political slide of wonder that we're in right now, it seems like it's only getting further and further through that divide. And a lot of people have kind of like made reference that Trump supporters and like left-wing Hillary supporters, like the ultimate solution would be total unity. and
It's
I fear
impossible.
is unrealistic at in the most basic sense with the way it is now, because people on both sides can't even agree with each other.
They can't even really communicate on a basic level. Just have a civil conversation. Everything's so much screaming and yelling, and it's just like, I don't know. There's not a whole lot of listening going on.
Within the same parties, even.
Yeah.
People aren't listening to their peers on that front.
And what kills me is, like, you see on Facebook, especially during the election, it was like, if you're a Trump supporter, just unfriend me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one way to go about your ideology, is to just like shut out all other opinions, and you could basically equate the message with hate itself and just get it out of your life. But that is dangerous. You know, it's really dangerous, because even if you don't agree with something, first of all, cutting out that perspective is limiting yourself. And also, the main danger is that that's a human being that otherwise you would have been friends with, that is no longer in your life because two big ideologies clash, and they controlled your mind enough to make you disconnect with another human being, thus literally creating a rift that I'm talking about between the left and the right. And when that's happening for the gain of both of those parties, there's no incentive at a structural level to actually help people come together with any sort of real unity. And so it makes it even harder for us to actually organize and hear each other out. I mean, at least we need to be hearing each other out, because even though Trump supporters are probably a little bit more racist by and large, and like they might not care that they're the person who's their candidate is promoting rhetoric that is I don't know, just plain fucking evil. Just despite all of that, there's still people with real problems, and that's why they chose that path in the first place. And so, if we could just cut through the assholery on both sides and hear each other's problems, there could at least be a push towards making a solution.
Right, because they're behind him for a reason. There's some motivation, there's some problem that they feel like he can fix. Well, there's a problem, he doesn't have to be the answer.
Right.
And so we could work together to find that.
Well, it's like that problem has been turned, instead of you're a person, a lower middle income white dude living in Wisconsin or whatever, or Nevada or somewhere, it's now you're a Trump supporter. So it's like the political campaigns have co-opted these real issues into one of two camps. And you can no longer talk about fixing those issues because it's equated with Trump. Even though your problem was real, most likely fixable, and most likely identifiable with anyone in the United States. Now that you're a Trump supporter because you've chosen that path, your problem is now not the problem of your opponents.
Yeah.
And therefore, it can never be solved through working together.
It's like you're seen as a fanatic for that idea. It's the same thing if you talk to any car people about the difference between Dodge, Ford, and Chevy. Ford guys, they're going to stand by their Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Dodge guys, they're going to stand by their Dodge.
And they're going to make fun of the Ford for being a Ford because they're Dodge guys.
Right, when most of the parts are made in the same area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, if they work together, they could create the ultimate truck, right?
Exactly.
But they never will, because they will not listen. Like, the Chevy guy is not going to listen to the Ford guy because the Ford guy's a Ford guy. It has nothing to do with the fact that there's different, like, small details.
And nothing to do with the ingenuity or the engineering behind what's actually going on. At this point, it really becomes just fantasy.
I love that is the metaphor we went for. Is like, oh, Ford, Chevy, and Dodge.
It's true, though. It's the
Yeah, break it down to a simple level.
Who's the libertarian equivalent of that, or the Green Party equivalent? I just want to know.
Jill Stein.
Well, I mean, in cars.
Oh,
the bicycle.
The Prius. Or maybe
Yeah.
the smart car.
in trucks.
Yeah.
In trucks. Jeez, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
The Flintstone, I guess that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were talking about how we keep separating from a point, and eventually we're not going to have any action or whatever. I feel like that moment will come.
It's gonna have to.
Because no matter what, there's already a distrust. Before this election campaign happened, there was already a distrust with politics in general, with our politicians, with the government. Now seeing a lot of this unfold, I think we're starting to realize that we're all in the same boat. And I don't know what that defining moment is, but I've said several times, there will be a defining moment that we as a nation, as a collective, decide, do we stand by for this or do we make a change? And it's impossible to know now because there's a million different possibilities that it could be. But that moment will present itself, and it would be undefiable, I feel like.
I mean, until the media is in the control of the people, it's going to make it so the people cannot organize.
Right.
I mean, the media, and I'm not just trying to, toot our own horns here because we're mass comm students, but the media really does control like public perception of all the events related to the politics of the day. And if instead of promoting agendas one way or the other, you got like two option type thing. If it just promoted truth, in a more objective, like top down view of like where we're at and how we could move forward, that's when people could easily decide, oh crap, yeah, maybe it is time we organize, But as it stands, it's like the more radical people that are the only ones attuned to that idea because they've always been attuned to that idea because they never follow the media, but the general public does.
One thing that I find that's absolutely hilarious, my dad watches a lot of Fox News, so I'm going to just pick them out specifically. Fox News will attack the media like they're not a part of the media, left and right. And if that doesn't say anything, then like if they're just here for entertainment, then I don't know what
media
does. Yeah. And just the media in general. CNN and Fox News are as much news as a fruit roll-up is a fruit. It just does not connect.
Are you telling me that a fruit roll-up's not a fruit?
Dum dum dum.
I mean, I don't know where that fits in the triangle in the food pyramid, but
is the food pyramid even still relevant, or have they replaced it?
My mom teaches first grade. They have since she's informing that they have since replaced the food pyramid.
It's flipped now, isn't it? It's something else.
I thought that was a South Park joke.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, they actually replaced it like a few years ago.
That was looked at when I was in school. That was looked at as objective truth. This is how you eat. This is the diagram to show it. If they can change that, then how much else of your reality? If they can change the goddamn food pyramid, how much else of your reality is just something that you were told in first grade?
It's so malleable.
Okay, I'm a little older than most of you guys, but who remembers when Pluto was a planet?
I mean, we all should.
We're
I still
90s
have-
kids.
Okay, I just want to check.
I know people who'll fight to the death about
I'm not that old, thank God.
No.
I mean, and like, to be fair, the definition for a planet is just set by some series of humans in a certain position.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not like Pluto changed. It's like our perception of what it is changed. And therefore, if you really want to get into it, anything that you think you know could be changed by the right dudes in the right committee somewhere.
Yeah, it's all I have a hard time saying this. Compartmentalized.
Compartmentalized?
And then categorized. You just change the categories. You just change the qualifications, and you can really change the overall being of almost anything in a label system like that.
And so when you look at like important issues, not like Pluto, but like our food and our medicine,
Our
Our
politics.
medicine.
and our politics. Yeah. But if we get into food and medicine and we have these standards for what is okay, what is acceptable, what is normal, if that can be changed at the whim of whoever's in charge, then there needs to be a lot more scrutiny about whoever's in charge. Because, I mean, as it stands now, I think the food in this country and the medicine in this country, it's a joke. I mean, like where the money's going, you know what I'm saying? It's going towards a system designed to make money, not towards feeding our people and helping our people.
And we know it, and that's
everyone
the
knows
disgusting thing about it. We know it, but we just
Accept
half-heartedly
it.
go on, with our everyday because it hasn't become that big of an issue to alter our routine or our pattern yet.
And they're never going to let it seem like such a big issue, but it's just going to get slightly worse and slightly worse and slightly worse until your rights are gone, all your food is gone, your access to real medicine is gone, and all you've got left are what they say is food and medicine. You know what I'm saying? Or what they say is like approved. I mean, I hate to bring marijuana into this, but like, god damn, it's 2017. We've been trying to get that shit legalized for like 50 years now.
A few states have.
A few states have, right? But federally,
It's still illegal, so it doesn't
federally,
matter.
those
really.
states are breaking the law. You know what I mean? And there's been DEA busts in almost all those states. And it doesn't, like law, no law. The media projection of marijuana, like the descriptions, the what's the word I'm looking for? Representation of marijuana in the media is still that of this evil fucking drug that's like they'll take how it's been used in edibles and concentrates and they'll talk about how that's the new form of the evil marijuana.
Yeah,
And
then
it's
you
the same as it's been for the last 50 years.
Yeah, the reefer madness, thinking even back to the 30s and
Right.
how, like, you know, what was the song? I think it was Cab Calloway or somebody, but I think it was The Reefer's Gonna Get You or something like that. I can't remember.
I mean, initially it was like racist. It was a way to like put down the black and Mexican community because they smoked, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to rape somebody, so don't smoke like the blacks and Mexicans. And all that did, that was like a loaded statement that just called blacks and Mexicans rapists, basically. Yeah. And it caused marijuana to be looked at as this evil drug used by, you know, races that at the time were viewed as like non-human in a way.
Mm-hmm. I will say that in our lifetime, if marijuana is federally legal, I was having a really interesting conversation with a friend a while back about it. And you look at how much money can be made in the marijuana trade, I guess. Either starting your own farms, starting your own stores, doing it any kind of sense like that. Our government essentially is set up to not allow a huge influx of trade and stuff like that to happen. So I guarantee you the day after, if not the day after, then a week after marijuana is federally legal, Marlboro, Basic, all these cigarette companies are going to have in place their own factories, their own way of basically almost monopolizing that entire trade again to where...
I heard Marlboro already has... They already have the marijuana cigarette thing, and they're just waiting.
Exactly. And so there's factories... this is all conspiracy now at this point, but I guarantee you there's factories all over the United States waiting for that press to change. And so the moment they change, they're right there on that front.
Because then the little guy would have no chance of getting up in that business and creating a new industry for himself. It would just be the big tobacco companies.
Exactly. You know? Waking up from the American dream.
I remember there's back when they ended the prohibition on alcohol, there was a brewery that actually dropped off several cases just right in front of the White House. And it was the type of beer that took like 2 weeks to brew. So they had been making it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, fun little history trivia there.
I don't think that the weed prohibition is going to end until the media embraces it for what it really is. Because as soon as that happens, that's the one thing in my opinion, that's the one thing keeping it illegal.
How sensationalized it gets.
Yeah, I mean, like, doctors are all saying that it's fine, you know, including, like, my own doctor. And, like, people are all saying it's fine. Alternative media is all saying it's fine. Artists are all saying it's fine. History's saying it's fine. The only people not saying it's fine are the government and the media.
Well, you look at the majority of tradition. So right now, our generation is just getting to that point to where we have a little bit of voice in what goes on in the world. Mm-hmm. Still, though, the majority of politicians, the majority of anyone who has any kind of power in our government or our country are going to be an older type generation with older set traditions and older set standards. And so the majority of the people who I feel like are watching that media that's portraying everything as bad like that is just playing to what they want to hear because they were part of that older generation.
It's just the rhetoric gets fed back.
Yeah.
Regurgitated and spit right back up.
So,
the baby boomers.
Here's an idea. I believe you have to be 35 years of age to run for Congress, correct?
That's president.
Yeah, but, Congress, you need to be...
I'm not sure what the age is for Congress.
Because...
Sure. A minimum of 104.
Yeah, and you have to stay there for 100 years.
Yeah. But it basically, I think in the next couple of years, I'm pretty sure it's 35 because, lines of secession, thus you must be 35 to be president. And thus. Anyway, but I think Generation Y here in the next, few years will actually have some congressional representation because we will start running for Congress. And I think that's going to be a part of it, is like it's not just voting, because at the moment we're stuck with old white guys and a couple of Gen Xers, but once our generation actually is in there. You know.
But who of our generation? Probably the same type of people who have been raised by the previous people, you know what I mean?
By the boomers.
I don't know.
Okay, fair point.
Follow history. Follow that bounce of sensationalism, or that bounce of everybody goes in one way. There's a counter push that pushes at the other. There's that counter push that pushes at the other. The direction that we're heading in, we're going right for another counterculture movement.
Hopefully.
Definitely.
Yeah, and hopefully learning from the past, not saying that the last countercultural movement wasn't impactful. This one may have a little more suit and tie aspect to it, to where we can be in power, get things done.
Yeah, we just need, instead of having, like, you look at you look at the Black Rights Movement, and they were perhaps infinitely more successful in bringing about change in their communities than the hippies were, but they were happening almost concurrently. And the hippies piddled out because the media found enough evidence to support that they were actually like some evil group of like just druggies, and the media made it so there was no underlying point there. And to a degree, they opened themselves up for that, primarily with just the association with heavy drug use, being so hard to identify with. In general, it's like either you are or you aren't, and long term that basically it made it really easy for the media to say, like, don't let these hippies ruin our country. You know what I mean? And like that's another part. That's when the war on drugs started. You know, they could put the black and the hippie leaders away for good if you could catch them with the right drugs. You know.
Until you hit that last point, it sounded just like you were describing today. Instead of the hippies, replace it with liberals, or replace it with these Gen Xers. And it's that same concept.
They'll compartmentalize you. They'll put you in a box, and then they'll say, "Look at this. Don't be like this. This is evil."
Yeah, and using the media as the smoking gun of how to kind of change that perspective or keep that perspective a certain way.
So that's depressing.
Until we make a change. One thing to keep in mind, though, look at how large our country is. It's going to take whiles. It's going to take a while for it to make any kind of major steps or major movements. We have a lot of weight we have to throw around. So it takes a lot of energy to move all of that weight. And that's the thing, is we just can't get discouraged, and we have to stay consistent on what our actual beliefs are. And then we can definitely shape mountains in that sense, I feel like.
Move forward together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like a good place maybe to wrap up for today. What do you guys think?
I think so.
We're 42 minutes in, so.
All right, you guys. Well, it's been a pleasure talking, and thank you to the listener for listening to the bulk of the B3 podcast. The Blue Banner is a weekly podcast for UNCA. Peace, y'all.
Bye.
See it.
Yeah, bye.
And now on B3, as a special tribute for Black History Month, we'd like to welcome special guest Ben Bond, who has prepared a fine speech.
Imagine America without Black history. You couldn't. The horrific truth about our nation and how it was founded is that without slavery, America would have been nothing but a bunch of fleeting farmers trying to break free from the British, unable to organize any government because they would have been too occupied with their crops. Frederick Douglass, abolitionist and former slave, found that freedom lied within the mind, and that regardless of one's stance in society, one can realize true freedom and success through intellect. Langston Hughes wrote about the inequality of redlining in New York City, where families were prevented from living in certain areas because of the color of their skin, asking, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or does it explode? On August 28, 1963, dreams were no longer deferred. It was time for a change, one of the greatest demonstrations of freedom of all time. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was heard across the nation, showing that people of color were no longer to be silenced. That fallacies of beating men and women in the streets with dogs and hoses for being black, not allowing a tired woman to sit at the end of a long day for being black, not letting men eat at restaurant booths for being black, were no longer actions that represented our country. That we should stand for what the Declaration of Independence explicitly states, that all men are created equal. Black history represents something that goes beyond just our country. It represents the achievement above and beyond any limitations and the ability to break free from stereotypes that others or yourself put on oneself. It is a celebration of culture and individualism. Nelson Mandela, who was president of South Africa and anti-apartheid leader, said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." 8 years ago, the first African American president of the United States was inaugurated and brought our country closer together because of his symbolic stance for change and unity across the country. We cannot live under a shadow of the past because these qualities of our countries that elected this man still exist and are strong in representing our nation. We cannot dwell in the idea that our country is now more split than ever. Black History Month is a time where we need to collect ourselves and know that we stand together not just as a country, but as people, as brothers and sisters, that everyone is a part of the beautiful opportunity of what it means to be alive. Let it not be tarnished in anger and defined by the setbacks of such deaths of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, but use those tragedies as a motivation that we can move into the future with delicacy to treat each member you see on the passing street as a life that matters. Black history is not something that can be summed up in a month. We need to understand that inclusivity of all people should not be something that can be done 1 month out of the year because Black history is just history. It should be a moral standard which represents our history as a whole.
I think that's a wrap, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in to the B3 podcast. We are the Blue Banner's official podcast. I'm Nick, signing off.
I'm James Hughes. Have a good one.